Hello and welcome to AircraftGrade, the podcast all about commercial aviation. I'm your host Alex, and coming up this week, JetBlue reveals new aircraft for London flights. As airlines start to introduce health passports, we find out exactly what these are. Iran Air trying to order new aircraft under President Biden. And what is the future of aviation fuel, and how can the industry reduce its carbon footprint? Before we take a deep dive into our main topics, let's first round up the key aviation stories from the last week, giving you my opinion along the way. Airbus is seeking an ETOPS rating for its new Beluga XL. The Beluga XL is Airbus's new cargo plane to transport wings, fuselages, cockpits and other key parts of new aircraft between their factories. In order for them to be able to fly this new aircraft over water for a considerable length of time, they need to get an ETOPS rating. Although, considering it's based off an A330, I don't think it'll be too difficult. Emirates and Virgin Atlantic have extended their South African flight bans. In my eyes, this makes sense, considering the South Africa variant of COVID is being discovered in other places around the world. This seems like the best way to stop further spread, in my opinion. I'm not really sure how our next story happened, but a stowaway has survived a Turkish Airlines flight from Maastricht by climbing onto the landing gear of the airplane. This seems like a massive security risk, and I've got no idea how this could even happen, especially during COVID. Lufthansa have completed their 30-hour round trip from Hamburg to the Falkland Islands after taking crew to and from the Polar Stern research vessel. This was their longest flight ever. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. Ever since US low-cost airline JetBlue commenced operations in February 2000, they've set a benchmark for how domestic and transcontinental travel should be done. JetBlue started with emulating the goal of Southwest's success and their low-cost approach, but aimed to improve on their proven formula. The Long Island-based carrier introduced amenities not found on any US low-cost carriers, including in-flight entertainment, TVs for every passenger, and Sirius XM satellite radio. They launched with 75 takeoff and landing slots at JFK in New York and operated services to Buffalo and Fort Lauderdale. JetBlue was very successful in the budget carrier space. It was so popular that it was one of the few US airlines to make a profit during the aviation downturn after 9/11. They were so successful that legacy carriers like Delta and United even set up their own low-cost carriers to try and stop JetBlue. Both miserably failed. JetBlue experienced swift growth in the early 2000s, turning a profit every year. However, aviation analysis at the time said this level of growth was unsustainable. They proved to be correct. In 2005, JetBlue faced their first quarterly loss, likely due to the increase in fuel prices. This led to their first yearly loss. They also maintained a policy to never cancel flights. This came back to bite them when blizzards hit the northeast and midwest of the US. JetBlue were reluctant to cancel flights, leaving passengers waiting for hours, sometimes even in the aircraft, until they were eventually cancelled, nearly 1,700 flights, costing them $30 million. In recent years though, JetBlue has returned to being one of the best carriers in the US, and in 2013 transformed itself into a premium airline on transcontinental routes after the introduction of its Mint business class cabin on selected A321s. These seats featured lie-flat beds, movable partitions, and quality food offerings. This really cemented them as not only a rival for Southwest, Spirit, Frontier and Allegiant, but also a key player in the premium US airline market. In 2019, it was really no surprise then when the airline announced it would be launching New York and Boston flights across the pond to London. JetBlue said they'd operate these new flights with 13 brand new A321LRs, the first of which has already been delivered, and since the initial order they've also purchased 13 A321XLRs, which have an even longer range but won't be delivered until 2023. In November 2020, JetBlue revealed the airport slots they'd been granted. To say they were disappointed would be an understatement. They'd requested 48 weekly Heathrow slots, but all were denied. Instead, they were granted 14 weekly Gatwick slots, half of what they requested, and 28 weekly Stansted slots. They were all granted from their requests. They plan to fly to Gatwick from JFK with one daily flight, and they have planned twice daily flights from Stansted to Boston. These slots are far from ideal, but some are better than none. After being denied half of its Gatwick slots and all of its Heathrow slots, JetBlue filed a complaint with the US Department of Transportation. They claim that they're being locked out of London and specifically called out airlines like Virgin Atlantic, who have ceased operations from Gatwick, and Norwegian, who have ceased long-haul operations for them being awarded slots despite not actually needing them. There is some good news for JetBlue customers though, as on February 1st they announced their new Mint business class for its A321LR fleet and some of its A321neo aircraft. This new product offers direct aisle access for all seats, an improvement from the previous generation of Mint. The seat is also manufactured by Thomson Aero Seating and is in a herringbone configuration to give passengers maximum privacy. All seats feature large entertainment screens, large amounts of storage space, and a door to create a private suite. As soon as JetBlue announced London services in April 2019 and showcased their new product on Monday, people started to say things like this is the end of BA or carriers with large transatlantic presence would be in trouble. I don't think this is the case, however. Airlines like BA and Virgin have excellent loyalty programs and route networks outside of the US. And also, it wouldn't make sense for a long-term BA or Virgin customer to switch to JetBlue unless they travel to the US a lot. Most customers love BA and Virgin because they fly to many destinations from the UK, so in my opinion that won't be an issue for British legacy carriers. However, JetBlue has taken over a very lucrative market. With the departure of Norwegian, there are now very few airlines that fly low-cost transatlantic. So JetBlue is entering a market with little to no competition. But I don't think this is JetBlue's targeted market. They're aiming directly at defeating Delta, United and American, just like they did back in the early 2000s. Exciting times ahead for the US airline market. In December 2016, Airbus confirmed an order from Iran's flag carrier, Iran Air. This order was possible after the Obama administration signed a nuclear deal with Iran in 2015, lifting sanctions. Fearing that sanctions could be reinforced again quickly, Iran Air ordered a lot of aircraft, almost straight away. The new deal allowed the airline to order new planes and refuel in Europe. They ordered 21 A320 series aircraft, 24 A320neo series aircraft, 27 A330s, 18 A330-900 neos, 16 A350-1000s and 12 Airbus A380s. The carrier also placed an order with Boeing for 50 737 MAX aircraft, 15 777-300ERs and 15 777-9s, as well as ordering 20 ATR 72-600s. It seemed like Iran Air ordered as many aircraft as they could to increase their chances of getting some delivered before inevitable further sanctions. Turns out they were correct. When President Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal, the sanctions would be in place again after 2018. Boeing and Airbus were only given 90 days to fulfill deliveries. This left Iran Air only receiving one A321, two A330-200s and 13 ATR 72s. Due to the sanctions, Boeing had to cancel Iran Air's order, but technically their orders from Airbus still stand. Iran Air is hoping the new administration will reverse the sanctions, and according to Press TV, Iran has reached out to Boeing querying their order. The Boeing deal would have provided 100,000 jobs and was valued at over $16.5 billion. Airbus can't deliver aircraft either, since their planes use American technology. Iran Air's fleet is getting old, with an average age of 18.6 years, and if these sanctions continue, they could be stuck between a rock and a hard place. The pandemic has caused a massive downturn in global aviation demand. However, in order for the industry to begin recovering, many countries and airlines have required negative COVID tests before boarding flights. This has allowed people to travel despite current restrictions. However, proving negative tests has been found difficult for passengers, with different types of tests, as well as different airlines and countries requiring different timeframes from test to flight. However, one thing that could see this improve, along with the introduction of the vaccine, is a health passport. Many airlines, including British Airways, Copper Airlines, American, Emirates and Etihad, have started either trialling or fully introducing health passports for their passengers. But what are they? Let's take a look. British Airways, Alaska and American Airlines are using an app called Verifly, and it verifies passengers' information and documents for the airlines. When passengers want to travel, they select their destination and the app populates the flight details. It will then ask the passenger for the required information. For example, over in the States, passengers need to confirm their passport, fill out a health declaration and send a picture of a negative COVID test. The Verify team will then confirm the requirements have been met and give the passenger a pass or a fail. The team are being overly cautious of verifying COVID tests. understandably, and may ask a passenger for more information. With the app, American has said they have had 4.8 out of 5 stars of satisfaction, and it has saved passengers large amounts of time. IATA is also launching their own travel pass with airlines Qatar, Etihad and Emirates. The IATA system is very similar to that of Verifly, and hopefully, in the near future, both will be used by all airlines around the globe. Possibly the only positive of the slowdown in aircraft movements and reduction of flights during 2020 and beyond is a substantial reduction in CO2 emissions caused by air travel. But demand will and is returning, so a more permanent solution for reducing aviation's emissions problem is required. Today we take an in-depth look into the future of air travel. But first, let's outline the current problem as a result of the aviation industry. In 2019, worldwide flights produced 915 million tonnes of CO2 emissions, a slight decrease from the year before. In total, this equated to roughly 2% of all human-induced emissions, but only 12% of total emissions from all transport sources. Now, it's quite easy to look at these figures and think there isn't really an issue here, but let me put it into perspective. The aviation industry produced an equivalent of 4,986 747s worth of emissions in 2019. That is over 3 times the amount of 74s ever built. It's almost inconceivable. So how can the aviation industry be made more sustainable for our environment? Well, the obvious solution is changing the fuel used in aircraft. The most researched alternative fuel is hydrogen. Airbus have been at the forefront of bringing hydrogen planes into service, announcing their Zero-E project last year, and debuting 3 concept aircraft: a turboprop, similar to the ATR 4272 and Dash 8, a turbofan, like the A320, and a blended wing design, something frequently dreamed of, but never built. Aircraft would use hydrogen fuel in a liquid form, stored in a large tank in the fuselage. Liquid hydrogen needs to be stored in the fuselage because it's quite volatile by nature, meaning storing it in the wings is an impossibility, as tanks need to be pressurised. Hydrogen can either be burned in a jet engine or can be used in a fuel cell to generate electricity to power a propeller. To use hydrogen in combustion, you burn liquid hydrogen with oxygen in the gas turbine, which then creates energy to spin a turbine or engine. When hydrogen is combusted with oxygen, its only product is water, which is completely pollutant-free and clean for the environment. Hydrogen fuel can also be used with existing aircraft technology. Only the engines and fuel system of a plane need to be changed for it to be able to be powered by hydrogen. The second way of using hydrogen to produce power is with hydrogen fuel cells. A fuel cell converts energy stored in molecules into electricity through an electrochemical reaction. A typical fuel cell is comprised of 2 electrodes, an anode and a cathode. Hydrogen enters the fuel cell at a negatively charged anode and is split into electrons and protons. Oxygen enters at the cathode. The protons, which are positively charged, pass through an electrolyte membrane to the cathode, and the negatively charged electrons flow out of the fuel cell and create an electrical current, which can then be used to power a propulsion system. Finally, the protons and the oxygen combine at the cathode to produce water. Fuel cells have many advantages. For example, they constantly generate electricity as long as hydrogen is provided. They can also be stacked to produce more power, allowing them to adapt to different requirements, and because there are no moving parts, they're silent and reliable. Airbus, in their Zero-E aircraft, plan to combine traditional hydrogen-powered gas turbine engines with fuel cells to create a highly efficient hybrid electric propulsion system. However, hydrogen power does have its flaws. The main downside of hydrogen fuel, when combusted, is its energy density. Energy density is the amount of energy stored in a given system, in this case the hydrogen, per unit of volume. Traditional jet fuel has a typical energy density of around 9.6 kilowatts a litre, whereas hydrogen has an energy density of around 2.8 kilowatts a litre. This would mean that to get the same amount of energy from liquid hydrogen as in jet fuel, you'd need about 4 times as much. This directly links to the maximum range of an aircraft can achieve when powered by hydrogen. Airbus's hydrogen concepts have a maximum range of just over 2,000 nautical miles or 3,700 kilometres in a 200-seat aircraft. That's about half of what the A320neo can achieve. The other significant flaw of hydrogen-powered aircraft is actually getting the hydrogen. KLM would use up the world's supply of biofuels in just under a day of normal operations. The amount of hydrogen produced is just a fraction of the amount of biofuels. There really isn't much available. And out of the total of hydrogen produced, roughly 95% was produced by steam reforming, which is a reaction of hydrocarbons and water, which produces carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So this green fuel quickly becomes a lot less green. And it's also worth quickly mentioning that very few, if any, airports have the required infrastructure to fuel hydrogen planes. The same can't be said for our next alternative fuel. Recently, a team of scientists from Oxford University have come up with a process to turn carbon dioxide into jet fuel. The process uses an iron-based chemical reaction and could result in net zero emissions from aircraft. When traditional fossil fuels burn, their hydrocarbons are turned into carbon dioxide and water, which releases energy. The process conducted by the team at Oxford reversed this phenomenon to turn CO2 back into a fuel using a process called organic combustion. By adding heat of around 350 degrees Celsius to citric acid, hydrogen and a catalyst made of iron, manganese and potassium to carbon dioxide, a liquid fuel can be produced to work in a jet engine. Although the experiment used CO2 from a canister, the plan would be to capture large amounts of greenhouse gases from either factories or directly from the air to remove it from the atmosphere. The team say this method would be cheaper than hydrogenation, which uses hydrogen and water. Jet fuel made from CO2 is argued to have a much smaller environmental impact than traditional fuels, as the CO2 produced from its combustion will just be used over and over again to make new fuel. However, it's a carbon net neutral fuel, net being the key word, which means that it's still producing CO2 even if its production removes CO2 from the atmosphere. On top of that, the carbon dioxide capturing equipment is very costly to install and use. Its production also relies on other industries continuing to produce copious amounts of carbon emissions, which isn't desirable. Okay, so there's two examples of some of the fuels we could potentially see used in the future. But what about batteries? Well, I've deliberately not mentioned battery-powered aircraft until now, and this is because I believe they're the least likely solution for green aircraft. Unlike cars, planes are very sensitive to weight, so a high energy density fuel is key to a light and long distance aircraft. So I mentioned earlier the energy density for jet fuel is around 9,600 watts per litre, which converts to around 12,000 watts per kilogram. Batteries have an energy density of a measly 250 watt per kilogram. Batteries are also very heavy, and unlike a traditional jet fuel, don't get lighter as the capacity runs out. This means that, for a plane like the Airbus A380, it can only fly 1,000 kilometres on batteries versus 15,000 kilometres of kerosene-powered range. The weight of batteries required to achieve its standard range is 30 times heavier than the fuel required, meaning the aircraft would never get off the ground. This phenomenon is the same in traditional jet aircraft. In order for them to fly further, engines need to be more efficient as well as adding extra fuel tanks, because after a certain amount of fuel is loaded, you require more fuel to carry the extra fuel to fly further, if that makes sense. In my opinion, I see batteries suiting the general aviation market well. The largest battery aircraft to fly, an electric Cessna Caravan 208B, can seat only 9 passengers, but the price for 30 minutes of flight was only £4.80 compared to £240 to £320 with conventional jet engines. So to round this section up, I think the future of plane fuels is very exciting. If you were to ask me, I'd say the concept most likely to come into commercial service would be Airbus's Zero-E turboprop powered by hydrogen. This is probably the most achievable in terms of range and efficiency, as turboprops are more efficient than jets on short flights, and it doesn't clash with any of Airbus's current offerings. Well, what about long haul? Well, unfortunately, I don't really have an answer for you. Hydrogen power has a very limited range, as of now, and carbon dioxide fuel isn't produced in large enough quantities. This is a problem. Over 80% of aviation emissions are from flights over 1,500 kilometres. In this case, the typical carbon offset programs and pre-existing biofuels may be the best solution. Biofuels are made from plants like sugarcane, grasses, palm oil and animal waste products. All these contain carbon so can be processed and used as jet fuel. But you could argue it might not even be an issue. I'm not trying to downplay the effect aviation has on the environment. However, I do think that it's used as a scapegoat for global warming. People are quick to blame planes when actually their environmental effect is so little in the grand scheme of things. Just something to think about. Now it's time to cover the most important airplane orders and deliveries over the last week. UPS has received its first upgraded A300 from Honeywell since they undertook upgrades for all their A300 fleet in 2017. The upgrades add new LCD displays, FMS, weather radar and so much more. Nordic Aviation Capital has delivered its first Embraer ERJ190 to America's new airline Breeze. This is the first of 15 it will receive from the lessor. Vietjet, Flynas and Gulf Air have taken delivery of A320neos, and Delta Airlines have received two A220s, one smaller -100 and one larger -300. Sunwing, Copper Airlines and American have all received 737 Maxes. European Aviation has received an ex-Virgin A340-600 and UPS has taken delivery of an MD-11F. The RAF have also just got a brand new Boeing P-8A Poseidon, a military aircraft based on the 737-800A. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you for listening to the AircraftGrade podcast. If you did enjoy it, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or your favourite podcast player. If you do have any feedback, you can tweet us at AircraftGrade or DM us on Instagram. aircraftgrade.co.uk, our website is now live, so make sure to check that out. I've been Alex, have a decently average week. Goodbye.